You're listening to the Business Communicators.
Joining us now on the Business Communicators is Jamey Rootes, the president of the Houston Texans, and he's one of Houston's leading executives for more than 2 decades. You've probably seen him around town several times, but he's in charge of basically all of the business operations for the Houston Texans franchise, and also he is the author of the new book, which you can find on Amazon, The Winning Game Plan, a proven leadership playbook for continuous business success. Jamey Rootes, we're excited to welcome you on to the Business Communicators podcast.
Austin, it's great to be with you.
Well, I'm really excited about this. You know, we mentioned a little bit beforehand that, I worked in sports for about 5 years and, it was just such a fun time. I mean, there was just so much going on. I mean, yes, you're working long hours, but it's just so rewarding and, each week, that game week. But 2020 has been different. And I can't think of a crazier time in the sports world. I mean, we went 4 months without sports, then NBA came back with the bubble. And there was questions on whether or not the NFL would come back and what that would look like. And I know there's been a lot of change for the Texans organization this year. Bill O'Brien let go, DeAndre Hopkins traded. Obviously now dealing with COVID-19. I know you guys have limited fans at NRG Stadium. What has it been like for you? Kind of managing that and managing this change in 2020 as we've had to navigate this pandemic, from a sports and business perspective?
Austin, I'll tell you that while it has been the most challenging season that I've had in sports, I've been in the sports business for 25 years. It really has been the most rewarding. And I think it really does kind of choke me up when I think about it. The character, work ethic, attitude that exists within this building is absolutely palpable. And the fact that, you don't know that until you get in times of challenge. John Wooden said, adversity doesn't build character, it reveals it. And whether that's battling through Hurricane Harvey or Hurricane Rita or all the other storms we've had to deal with, or the NFL lockout, or dealing with COVID, our folks, there is a whatever it takes attitude that I am so proud of. And because it's really important to them. And to your point about whether the NFL would come back or not, there's no doubt in this building. And you got to have the right attitude. We were going to start our season on time as scheduled. And if that doesn't happen, we'll pivot from that plan.
You've got to be able to pivot. You've got to be able to adjust. And you mentioned Hurricane Harvey just a few moments ago. And I think that's one of the cool things about sports is that it can really bring us together. We can really rally behind sports. And for Hurricane Harvey, it was so great to see the city, rally behind the Astros in their championship run back in 2017. And I know for me personally, it was such a relief, that first week of the NFL to finally have the Texans on, finally have Scott Hansen and the NFL Red Zone channel on, and I think it was just such a sense of relief. Was that sort of like a return to normalcy for you, just knowing that the league was back, even though it looked a little bit different this fall?
Well, it was weird. It was throughout the off season, but we were executing things that were really energizing. The fact that we were able to go through the free agency. You talked about a player that left that wasn't that popular amongst Houstonians, but at least we did get through free agency and we did the draft. And that was just a monumental challenge. And then we had our off season program for the players, albeit virtual. You felt like we are absolutely battling through it. But I'll tell you, when I got to July, which is a time where we kind of take a breath, the coaches go away, everybody tries to take a little bit of vacation. I started to slip into a bit of a depression because I was having to wrestle with, oh my gosh, I'm going to be pressured to put fans in the stadium. And I don't want, it's kind of like seeing the bride halfway dressed, right? You don't do that. On wedding day, you wait till the bride's ready. And I did not, for 20 years, we've built this wonderful experience. And I felt like I was going to be dragged into having 10,000 people in here socially distanced with masks on and all kinds of sanitation stuff. But my attitude was lifted when we played the Kansas City Chiefs. And so bless the Kansas City Chiefs for doing such a wonderful job. I've talked about Mark Donovan is a dear friend of mine. He's the president of the Chiefs. And a couple of weeks before we went up there, I said, are you seriously going to bring fans back? And he said, absolutely. And that's when the normalcy hit for me, was when I went into Arrowhead, sat in the suite, and I'm watching this game. I said, this doesn't look exactly like it normally does, but it's pretty darn good. And so we redoubled our efforts to get the approvals required. Unfortunately, we had already announced that the Ravens game would be played without any fans. But the next opportunity, we brought him in. It was wonderful. It was just so invigorating. That's kind of how I would state it. And that's, the normalcy set in for me when we played the Chiefs and had fans in the stands.
First of all, I want to tell you that I have been underlining some things in your book, The Winning Game Plan. You call it a proven leadership playbook for continuous business success, which I think is just really interesting. And some of the things as I go through the book, for me, I think what really stood out for me is the part where you describe how you were packing your mom up to come from Atlanta to Houston. And in that space is when you learned that Mr. McNair had passed. But you knew you needed to get back and you needed to be able to do something. And then you also described the whole tribute, which was so beautifully done in my book as you wrote it. But in that, I guess the question that I really want to ask is talk about a little bit about your relationship with Mr. McNair and what he meant to you and what he meant to this city.
Well, it was a 20-year joyous ride of almost 20 years with him. Probably, I hate to say it because you always want to, put sunshine on your parents, but he probably had more influence on my development than anybody, just by who he was, and the opportunity for me to have that friendship. This little story, Lamar Hunt is who I worked for before that. And I loved Lamar. It was an MBA in sports management. He was hand in hand with me building the Columbus Crew. And I recall back in 2006, he's really ill. He was suffering from cancer. And one night I sat down and wrote a letter to him to tell him all the things that I felt about him. And I had tears streaming down my face. And I put the letter in the mailbox and saw, I saw his wife, Norma, a little bit after that. And I said, did Lamar get the letter I sent him? She said, Jamey, no, he passed before it arrived, but he knew. And so with Bob, I swore I was not going to let that happen. The last meeting I had with Bob McNair while he was alive, we were sitting in his living room after a meeting. And I said, I don't know why I feel compelled to tell you this, Bob, but I was running with a friend of mine this morning. His name's Greg Kroenke, right? So Greg asked me, you know Bob as good as anybody. What's he like? And I said, Greg, you go to church each week and you read the Bible, as do I. And I believe the whole faith issue is about living to a Christ-like standard, knowing that no one can ever get there, but that's where you're always aiming. No one that I have ever known or ever seen believed that more intently nor delivered on it more completely than Bob McNair. And he said, wow, Jamey, that is really high praise. And I said, you deserve it. And that was the last time I saw him.
Wow. There's some other things that I read in the book that stood out for me as well. I mean, I have just so many nuggets here that I can take back, but I love also how you talk about R&D. Rip them off and do it better.
Yeah.
So as a leader and as you are communicating or talking to your team members or family members within the Texans in conveying something like this, what are some of the things that you have seen over time that you could just pull from someone else and you knew that you could do it better? What was the one thing that you remember the most?
Let me just tell you a little bit about it first globally, and then hopefully it'll come to me what the best example was. But Hattie, I go to football games all fall, college games, pro games. And I remember we were coming back from one game and Rick Smith, who was our general manager at the time, was over in the seat next to me. And I'm furiously scribbling down notes. And I have all these photos that I'm dealing with. He goes, what are you doing? I said, what do you think I do at the game? I spent about an hour and a half going all around taking pictures and then sending it back to our guys to say, hey, look, what a great idea. Let's rework it and let's put it into what we do. And maybe I was at the Tennessee Titans game and I'm walking the concourse and there are these concession workers at this grab and go stand. And I said, hey, ma'am, how has this worked? She said, you are not going to believe this. This is the best thing we've ever done. I said, wait a minute. So I recorded her and she just went on to bet, and so now here at NRG Stadium, you got grab and goes all over the place, because if it works in one NFL environment, it's likely to work in another. And I know people are coming and they're copying us all the time too, but that's just one example where R&D really means so much. And I tell the story, and where it started from was when I was at Procter & Gamble, one of the head of the category of the laundry, which is where I was. All the newly minted MBAs are sitting around the lunch table, and he said, so what happens when you copy in school? And one smarty guy raised his hand. He goes, you get expelled. He said, that's right. What happens when you copy at Procter & Gamble? He said, you get promoted. And Procter & Gamble had this massive library of the best marketing ideas of all time. And so you went down there, figured out something that was similar to what you're doing, put your spin on it, and it works. And so I've used that same philosophy in sports.
I love that. And Thomas, I want to get to you in just a second, but a few weeks ago for IBC Houston, we had a webinar and it was featuring Taylor Bisciotti from the NFL Network and then Sam Batash from CBS Sports HQ. And for me, coming from a sports background, I've always thought that sports and communications were 5, maybe even 10 years ahead of the corporate world, and just, the innovation, trying to not only engage fans and players, but just, I felt that you have to be creative in sports to keep people interested. It's not just the product on the field. A lot of the stuff that you do is off the field, but what can you tell us about your role and just kind of pushing that envelope, being creative, and, maybe some insights into other things that you have seen sports and how they've impacted, just the general corporate world?
It's interesting, what other industry has an entire section of the paper every day devoted to them? Nobody. There's a sports page, business page covers all the industries. So the likelihood that you're going to be in there, it doesn't happen very often. That's why we have to be so creative and so innovative. It's because everybody wants to talk about us. And so you're either going to be whipsawed by by the media, or you're going to ride the wave and build relationships with the media. Think about the messaging. You don't talk to the media, you talk through the media, from the media to the fans, to build the perception of the team. Everybody wants to see themselves in their sports team. And so we try to embody the values of Houston, Texas. It wouldn't be the same if I was in New York, right? We'd do it very differently, because New Yorkers have a different expectation. They got a different ethos. But Houston is about pride, courage, strength, tradition, independence, traditional values, modern city. So that's what we try to reflect, and that's what we try to communicate through the media to the community.
Growing up, I always learned that if you steal from one source, it's called plagiarism. You steal from multiple sources, it's called research.
That's a good one. I like that.
And don't be afraid to use research all you can.
This is one example of the collaborative spirit that exists in the National Football League. The book, The Winning Game Plan, you mentioned earlier, it's at Amazon.com. It's also an Amazon #1 international bestseller on the Wall Street Journal list and on USA Today. So very proud that, are excited and really gratified that people have found it to be valuable. But a couple of weeks ago, I went to all of the presidents of NFL teams and sent them a long note. I said, guys, I know we fight vigorously on the field, but off the field, we're partners. One of our fellow NFL people from the Atlanta Falcons, Greg Beadles, he is the one who inspired this book. He asked me, he said, Jamey, you guys have won and lost just like everybody else, but you're always at the top of the business metrics. How did you do that? And so I've written this book, and I am providing you a chance for $1. Amazon won't let me do it for free. But for $1, you and everybody on your staff and steal whatever idea you want, because I just want, a strong league, strong teams make a strong league. And so the high tide lifts all boats philosophy. So anyway, that's just some background about how it came about.
You'd mentioned communicating through the media and looking at your past, going from corporate world to sports, soccer, and then now to NFL, arguably the pinnacle of sports in the United States.
I can argue with you about that.
Exactly. What are some of the lessons you learned going from the corporate to middle America sports program to now big city, fourth largest city in the country, hopefully soon the third. What are some of the lessons you've learned through that process and that journey?
Well, with what I do, it's not about sports. I just happen to be in a sporting organization. The fundamental business principles that facilitate success at IBM or Procter & Gamble or Academy Sports and Outdoors or whoever, those fundamental principles apply completely in the sporting world. Now, you have to have a little bit of a different attitude. For example, if my role, when I was a brand manager at Procter & Gamble, Cheer laundry detergent, I could do whatever I wanted to do with it. I could change the box. I could change the product. I could add ingredients. You get into a sports team, you're marketing people. And you can't do that with people. You have to embrace, hopefully you get the right people into your organization that reflect the ethos of the ownership and the community, but you really have to work with whatever you got. You know, your ingredients are what they got. This is my coach. This is my GM. These are my players. They are the best. And let me tell you why. You know, you can't shuffle the deck like you can, but most of the principles will apply in a sporting environment.
You know, I'm missing going into the office and the water cooler talk that always takes place because of all the analogies I end up using, whether I'm talking to a client of mine or working for a business. Hey, we're right there on the goal line. Let's push it across. Or, hey, that was a grand slam. And it's like every single verbiage comes from sporting activities. And I think that's one of the things that in today's world we're kind of missing is that cooler talk.
Well, let me tell you something funny. So I was the chair of the Greater Houston Partnership, and Angela Blanchard was one of the board members. We have 120 CEOs, and every meeting I would be using sport analogy after sport analogy. And so about 5 months in, she stood up. She said, I don't know anything about sports, but I love these analogies that you're using, right? So it does. I mean, people are just passionate about sports. And we were talking about corporate America and sports. That's why sponsorship works. Give me any, maybe with the exception of maybe Disney or Apple, but give me any corporate brand versus the sports team brand, huge affinity, not so much down here. And so when you put those two logos together, it causes a cognitive dissonance that in my mind, if this is with this, I can't reconcile that. So I automatically have to lift my perception of this other brand to match the one that I love so much. It's like the birds of a feather theory, right? So if Jim is with Bill and I think Bill's awesome, then Jim must be awesome too, because he's not going to hang out with trash, right? So that affinity, that's really, when you see people sponsoring sporting teams, that's what they're looking to get, is that borrowed equity, which is so valuable and generates all of that cooler talk.
I think brand equity is so important in sports. And, we see that every 4 years with the Olympics and just how important it is to elevate, the event, the team's brand. But I think that one of the things that we've seen in sports in particular the last few years is not only the, brands of the team or the franchise, but the personal brands of the players. And a lot of people are starting to leverage social media to enhance their brands. And we actually had a question submitted from a listener. And I think this kind of goes along maybe with that personal branding. But the question was, how do you cultivate leadership capabilities among your players? And is this something that happens organically, or is this something that you put intentional time and energy behind?
It's really a trial and error or experiential, or people. First of all, to be a leader on a team, typically you've got to have outstanding talent, right? If you're just a hard hat lunch pail guy, why are people going to follow you? But if you're an elite athlete, you have the potential for leadership. And then you have to want to lead. Because leadership is not about being in front. Leadership's about being in back. Leadership is the person that thinks about the entity more than they think about themselves. It's not the guy that goes out and tries to get the most sacks or have the highest completion percentage. Although the individual contributions are important, like Vince Lombardi said, individual commitment to a collective purpose. That's what makes a team work. That's what makes an organization work. That's what makes society work. That's what makes civilization work. So it's this dichotomy of leadership. You have to contribute as an individual, but you got to think about the whole. That's more important than the individual. And so people just, I think more so in sports, they're just natural leaders. Once you get into a corporate environment, there are all kinds of resources to help you understand how you can be a better leader, much more sophisticated. But in sports, it's just more, someone just has the it factor.
You talk about that you take loyalty all day over mere satisfaction. Can you talk a little bit more about that and what that means?
Satisfaction, achieving satisfaction. And one of our partners is JD Power and Associates, and they talk all the time about satisfaction. And while I think it's an outstanding organization, I think if they had to do it over again, they wouldn't talk about satisfaction, because when you're satisfied, that just keeps you around as long as there's not a better alternative. Where you want to get is loyalty, that this is made for me. This is my product. This is my service. This is my restaurant. This is my go-to watering hole. And I'm going to tell all my friends about it because it's the best. This is my ski resort. It's the best on the planet. The Galveston Country Club for me is like that. I mean, is it the most glamorous country club on the planet? No, it's actually the first ever established in Texas, but the people there are amazing. They just have become dear friends. And anybody were to ask me, should I join the club? Absolutely. It'll be the best decision you'd ever make. And those are the kinds of people. To truly be successful in the long term, you need to develop those advocates. There's a current AT&T commercial where the actress winds up turning to the camera and says, word of mouth advertising. That's what we did before commercials. And that actually, at the end of the day, advertising only gets you to try the product. And what brings you back is the experience. And if that experience is exceptional, to quote an old shampoo commercial, you tell two friends and they tell two friends, and so on and so on and so on. That's really how you build any brand.
That constant exceeding expectations. When I go to a game, I expect to have a good time and hope to win. And when I win, the expectations were succeeded. Now it's like, how do I get to the next one?
Yeah,
I 100% agree.
And that's what makes our job so hard is once you ring the bell, okay, got that. What are you going to do next? How are you going to exceed the expectation next time? And we are, uniquely a performance-based business, both on the field and off, because it's an experience, and we're only as good as our last game on the field and off the field. You have to set it up and you have to go out and do it. You can't read the notes. You have to sing them every time that you go out, and people's expectations don't get lower. They get higher. And so you're constantly reinventing yourself in order to exceed the expectation of your customers, of your fans, of your community, of everybody in your ecosystem.
I know the Texans right now, interim head coach Romeo Crennel, Rack, as a lot of people refer to him as, great guy. He's been in he's been in the league for so long, great coach, but he still has the interim tag. And I know that you guys are looking for a head coach, whether Romeo gets that shot or it's somebody else. When you look at a coach, are you evaluating just the skills that they've, the wins, losses, their scheme, what they've done in the past? Or are you also looking at maybe someone that's a communicator and can maybe bridge that gap between, the organization and the fan base?
Well, let me ask you, if you were going out and hiring a CEO, would you just look at their ability to drive revenue?
I would want them to win.
You'd want them to win?
Yep.
Well, a CEO in corporate America, you need a leader, a leader of men. That is the non-negotiable. After that, after we're convinced that we have a leader of men, a leader that a community will follow, that players will follow, that will do a good job coaching the coaches. Once we get comfortable there, then we'll start looking at the X's and O's. And hopefully we have several leaders that we can say, okay, now they've all met the minimum acceptable. Who's the best on the secondary components?
Absolutely love it. Well, if you want to give us any spoilers on maybe who you're talking to, we will let the business communicators break that. So,
I just hats off to Rack. He's been such a trooper to step in at this point in his career. He didn't ask for this. He stepped up because he loves the McNair family, loves this organization, and most importantly, cares deeply about all the players in the locker room and wanted to make sure that this season isn't sacrificed. They only have so many seasons in them. And so he wanted to make sure that they realized the best performance that they can. And like we said earlier, there's still a shot. We can get to the playoffs. Keep hope alive, Houston.
I absolutely love it. And Romeo Crennel is the oldest coach in the NFL history. And he's just done such a great job. And I think it's a testament to his leadership and the organization's leadership that, I think this team could have folded when Coach O'Brien was let go and the Texans didn't have the best start, although it was a difficult schedule. But like you said, they're still in the playoff picture. And I think that's a testament to the resiliency of the franchise and everyone that you guys have brought in. So Jamey Rootes, really want to thank you for joining
all the time. What matters is what happens in December.
Yep, exactly. Well, Jamey Rootes, we're really excited that you joined us today on the Business Communicators podcast. And I know that you're active on social media, you're active on LinkedIn, and of course, you've got the new book out. So we want to give you this chance for those maybe interested in following, the work that you do with the Texans franchise, or even just business tips. What is the best way for them to follow your work?
Well, first of all, read the book. All the proceeds will go to charity, go to the Houston Texans Foundation and benefit youth and education here in the greater Houston area. Number two is, you're right, LinkedIn. LinkedIn is where I'm most active. That's where business people, and I'm constantly pumping out just little paragraphs of things that are interesting to me that hopefully others find interesting or insightful, just different ideas. And then number three is I have a ton of resources at jameyrootes.com, JAMEYROOTES.com. And but definitely buy the book, or if you have a kid that would love to get into sports, buy the book for him, because that's just like an informational interview with the president of an NFL team.
I absolutely love it. And I will say that if you do have the opportunity to work in sports, do it. I think that for me, that has helped so much as a communicator. You have to wear multiple hats, especially when you're working, and at the college level. And I think that it can pay dividends for your career moving forward, whether you stick to sports or whether you move into the corporate world. But we'll include the show notes, all of the links to Jamey's information. And we hope that you purchase this book. But Jamey, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Awesome. Great being with y'all.
You're listening to the Business Communicators.